Good afternoon again to those who have just joined us for our What Works? Positive Interventions for Fathers. This is part 4 of our webinar series on men, masculinities, and fatherhood. My name is Pamela Khare. I'm the project lead for the Fathers Matter project at Heartlines, the Center for Values Promotion, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon. The Center for Excellence in Human Development at WITS, together with the National Research Foundation, collaborated with Heartlines on a series of 4 webinars on men, masculinities, and fatherhood. And this is the final installment of the series. A special thank you to WITS and the NRF for the most valuable partnership we've had. We'd also like to thank the Oak Foundation for their ongoing support and for funding this webinar series. Over the past 3 weeks, we've listened to topic experts share their research and knowledge on the state of fatherhood in South Africa, and also on toxic masculinity and its masculinities and its connection to gender-based violence, and also on the importance of the first 1,000 days. This week will be a little bit more interactive as we wrap up that webinar series with a practical look at what is working, what are those positive interventions for fathers that are working, what can we learn, and where the gaps are. So before I introduce you to our panelists for today's webinar, a few things to mention. The session is recorded and the link will be emailed to you. We'll also be asking you to please complete a short survey at the end of the webinar. So as you exit the webinar, you'll be directed to a survey link, to a survey where you'll complete. It will not even take 5 minutes of your time. As a learning organization, would basically want to improve on how we do these webinars in the future, so your input will be most valuable to us. Would also love to hear your comments and questions in the Q&A tab. So your questions to our panelists in the Q&A tab, but we'll also love this to be a very interactive session. So please utilize the chat box and weigh in on the various questions that we'll be asking our panelists. Would also like to engage, we'd also like to encourage some social media engagement. The hashtag is #FathersMatterZA, and you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also tag at HeartlinesZA, at COEHuman, at INRF_news. And for more resources and updates, you can also visit our website on www.fathersmatter.org.za. So I'm going to introduce you to our 3 panelists. I'm going to start off with Dr. Tawanda Makusha. Tawanda is a senior research specialist at the Human Science Research Council in South Africa. He holds a PhD in gender education and an MA in development studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He is also the co-editor of the first State of South Africa's report, Fathers Report, which was produced in 2018. Our second panelist this afternoon is Sulaiman Henry. He is a fatherhood facilitator at Sonke Gender Justice. He's been involved in the development and of parenting materials and interventions in different parts of the world, and continues to promote positive parenting and involve fatherhood as a tool to promote gender justice and to end gender-based violence. Welcome, Sulaiman, and welcome, Tawanda. Our third panelist is Percy Ntwane. He is a social policy manager from the Department of Social Development. He currently coordinates the Men's Forum within the department. Percy also coordinates the implementation of the Man Care program in all provinces in partnership with UNICEF and Sonke Gender Justice. Part of his duties at the department is also supporting the Deputy Minister of Social Development in launching the Men's Parliament and Boys Assembly in 52 districts in the country. So, like I mentioned before, today is going to be a lot more interactive. I'm very confident that we've got a lot of practitioners that are joining us. Please weigh in. Would love to hear your comments, would love to hear your thoughts, and to encourage you to engage on social media once more. So I am going to kickstart the session. It is very evident that we need a multi-pronged approach to programming and interventions. I want to kickstart this conversation this afternoon with asking our panelists, when it comes to programs or initiatives geared towards fathers and promoting positive fatherhood, what is currently working? And I also want to know what is not working, because that is how we're going to build on what is working. So I am going to start off with you, Percy, from the Department of Social Development. In your view, in your opinion, in your context, can you please share with us what is working when you're talking about programming and intervention? And then I will extend the question to our other panelists as well.
Thank you to the listeners and the viewers at home, and thank you to you, the facilitator. Understanding the nature and the extent of fathers in South Africa as a department, we started a process of developing the white paper on families with a view to strengthen family relationships and also to make sure that we empower parents to be in a position to discharge their responsibility to the vulnerable members of the families. Amongst the initiatives that we have started as a department, we currently running in all the 9 provinces. We've got a program on teenage parents. And I think I need to give context to this. It's not like we're encouraging teenage parents, but it's the reality that this is the problem that we are experiencing as a country. So we need to intervene, as a department when it comes to teenage parents. So what is working with this program is that we have noticed that the users of this program majority of them are mothers, teenage mothers. So we are now embarking in a process of making sure that we also encourage fathers to be involved also in raising their children, of which is a challenge, and some of these challenges are related to some of the cultural factors. As you would know, that issues around what people would normally call damage. In Tawanda, that is where now you take responsibility for being the father of the child. And some of those issues that they've raised, that they cannot be part of raising their children because they are not working themselves and they are teenagers themselves. And most of them are still in school. And then as a result, they tend to stay away from being part of raising their own children. That's one issue that we are experiencing.
Fantastic. But also, if I can just cut you short there, Percy, sorry. We are going to come into a question where we talk about best practice. But I think I'd love your opinion just overall. When you're looking at interventions across the country on what you know, what is working? And if you can just give me in like a comment, what is working? And then we'll move to best practice. And at best practice, you can tell us a little bit more about the intervention that you're referring to.
I think currently what is working, it's there seems to be an appetite from fathers to be involved, in the upbringing of their child. That is what is working. And then you can see by a number of structures that are established in all the 9 provinces. What is not working, I think we need to work a little bit on our legislative framework, or maybe let me not say legislative framework, but the attitude out there, because traditionally people would associate welfare services to girls and women. Exactly. And in that process, when we are trying to narrow the gap between men and women, we have sort of left men behind, in us trying to empower a girl child and women. So we've sort of left men behind, and then that gap is now beginning to show up, between the services that is available for girl child and for women, and the services that are available for boys and men. So I think that is what is not working currently. So what we need to do is to make sure that we put more efforts into making sure that we also come up with programs that are tailor-made for a boy child and men.
Thank you so much. That is very valuable. Tawanda, if I can move to you, and if you can share briefly what your thoughts, opinions, and experience has been as someone that is a topic expert in the area of fatherhood. When it comes to programming, what is working and what is not working?
Thanks, Pam. Good afternoon, colleagues. I think the starting point should always be that we need to acknowledge that fathers belong to families and communities. And that's critical. Like for interventions to actually be successful, there is that that fathers should not be treated as in isolation to their families, their family members, particularly like in the South African context, regardless of their residential, marital, or status. I mean, then the other critical issue that I think is important when we look at programming fathers is fathers are not a homogeneous group. We've got fathers in high who like rich fathers. We've got poor fathers. We've got fathers who are employed, fathers who are unemployed. So it should actually focus on specific needs of fathers in different circumstances and contexts. So that's it. So the third issue that I think is critical is fathers have different individual and contextual capabilities.
Okay, can you please expand a little bit more around that?
A father in a kind of like middle class to high income family might be able to afford provision more than a father who's unemployed and in kind of like deep poverty. So what we do is we need to look at those kind of like individual and contextual issues to say, okay, for a father who is working, parents might be very critical. It's very important. But then that intervention does not work for a man who's unemployed and who's suffering from poverty.
Exactly.
So what interventions are we then talking about for poor men who are unemployed? We need to then get issues like that.
Thank you so much, Tawanda. If I can just move on, but I like the point you bring across that our efforts in designing programs should look at various contexts and not just at one particular grouping. For instance, what came up with Vodacom, I think it was last week, where they introduced equal parental leave policy, which was gender neutral. It's one of the things that you're speaking to. So that works for a father that is employed, but for a father that is unemployed, that might not be.
It's not what he needs.
I see. Sulaiman, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Just overall, what is working? Where are the gaps?
I think there's still quite a lot of gaps. I mean, I'm thinking of when we started out with fatherhood work in 2013, there was almost no literature available to support some of the work that we've done. So we've kind of built our program around fathers being present in the lives of their children, fathers being supportive, and then promoting non-violence in the household. One of the early learnings was, we entered the field and we saw this perfect nucleus family, the father, the mother, and two children. And I mean, over the years, we've learned that, and as Tawanda was saying, we've learned that we had to adapt to the circumstances of fathers. Our literature is still painting a picture of that 66% of children are growing up without fathers. But actually, practice has showed us that many fathers, while they may not be living with the children or with their families, they are still quite supportive, they are still quite involved, and compared to many other countries, we still have a long way to go in terms of establishing interventions for those social fathers to be more involved, to be involved in programs, and to really find ways to support different types of families in our space.
I like that, Sulaiman. And you know what you mentioned, interventions aimed at social fathers, which is something that I haven't come across. And true, we still have a way to go. I mean, fatherhood is, when we speak about fatherhood, it's beyond biological, especially in the South African context. We speak about grandfathers, uncles, and cousins, and other male caregivers. So who, you know, and I'll let any of you that feel very strongly to answer this question, who are we leaving behind when we are having the conversation around in getting men being more positively involved in their children's lives? And I'll give you an example to start it off. You know, at Heartlines, we work with the faith-based community, and one of the aims that we want to do with our intervention is to bring along the church, who being a target group that we've worked with before, you know, into this conversation. We're saying a social structure like a church should be a key player in this conversation around father involvement. In your experiences, who do you think is missing in the conversation? So, I mean, if we're looking at the father from I think it's a social ecological model, we know that, you know, we cannot look at the father within the household only. We need to look at, you know, he lives within an ecosystem, he lives within a community, he lives within a society. So what are those other social structures, you know, and what are the missing voices that we're not quite getting as we're talking about this issue? Percy, you look like you've got, you're ready. Whose voice are we missing?
Thank you for asking that question. I think the most important, I think the key stakeholder that we're leaving out here is the voice. It's the voice of the child. Sure. Because we tend to think that we know what the child needs, of which sometimes it's wrong. I was just listening to my colleague saying we also need to look at the issue of the economic status, the class, and whatever. And in my experience and in my engagement with some of the kids in some of our dialogues that we normally have in communities, and I had this child who was very brave enough to stand up and say, but Father, it's, you know, we don't have to promote this idea of ATM fathers. That fathers, it's all about providing material things, you know, in the form of money and whatever. You know, this child stood up and say, you know, Father, I didn't care whether you were working or not. But what I wanted to know is that you are there for me, and then I can just reach out to you, knowing very well that you'll talk to me, and then I'll have that kind of a conversation. And I think this is what is missing, and then I think the system is beginning to also integrate that. Even during court proceedings, children are allowed to have a voice, to have somebody speaking on their behalf, to say what is it that they want out of this. I know divorce is a very traumatic experience, and then it's not because of their own making that they find themselves in that situation, but it's a very bad predicament that they find themselves, whereby they have to choose between the two parents. So I think the most important stakeholder that we are living in here is the child. Yes.
Sure. All right. I mean, I completely agree with you. The child is at the receiving end of a positively engaged father. So I completely agree with you. We need to put the child in the conversation when we're talking about father involvement. Tawanda, whose voice do you think we are missing? Who's a key player, a key stakeholder that you think we're not engaging enough, looking at the current interventions that are out there?
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, colleagues. I think, to me, what comes to mind is that when we conduct interventions and programming, we usually look at people who are available, who want to take part. So it's critical. In most interventions, I'll speak of even HIV interventions or the interventions. We look for people who want to be part of those interventions. And the people who are actually most vulnerable part in these interventions. And this, what I mean, like, for the biggest worry for me is usually when men take part in fatherhood interventions. These are men that are mostly present, if you get what I'm saying. So
we're not reaching
the
to the converted, is what you're saying.
We're actually not reaching fathers who we actually need to reach to say, okay, this father is absent or uninvolved, and how do we, because an intervention is something that needs to change behavior. Exactly. And mostly we get men who want to be good fathers and are ideally good fathers already, maybe in some way or another, and they just need, but the men that are actually in the deep are the ones that we're missing, to say, okay, so why is this happening? Like I know a study done some years ago on prison fathers, and they what they felt about being involved, and their kind of situation. So we need to now start looking and say, okay, who are these fathers who are actually just not present at all? Emotions, support, and all these, and say, okay, how do we get them on board? How do we get them actually be involved? I think that's a critical starting point.
I guess, Tawanda, just to comment on your point, is that we often look at early adopters, is what we call them, low-hanging fruit, and we're hoping that they in turn will begin to role model, I guess, to that is not present in a child's life. So we're hoping that maybe some role modeling will take place. They will see them being involved in their children's lives and then do likewise. Sulaiman, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the critical voice that is not, just briefly, so that we can move to our other question.
The assumption is that that many people are not involved. I think everyone is involved. They're just not consciously involved. Research has showed that 4 out of 5 men are actually fathers, whether it be as a social father, whether it be a coach, whether it be a neighbor, uncle, a grandfather, but they have some role to play in the life of a child. The sooner we allow them, or we make them conscious of the influence that they have on the child's life, the better then they can make sure that they impart those positivity and be a positive role model to the child. And I also think that, especially in South Africa, one of the key groups that we are missing in the conversation of fatherhood is mothers. Mothers play such an important role to fathers, often, or to fatherhood. Mothers are often, and often we can broaden it up to say, women are the ones who keep social norms intact. They enforce those norms by teaching our young children, this is what the man does, this is what the woman does. If you can't learn to cook, you'll never find a husband. If you are lazy, you'll never find a wife. If you don't have a good job, you'll never. So mothers are most of the times, they are the ones who are teaching this. So mothers, we've actually experienced this early on in implementation, that so we had the men in the room, the men was in the room and talking and changing, and then they get home and start cooking and cleaning and doing things, and then women are becoming suspicious. Why are you all of a sudden? What is happening? So
I hear you.
We need to bring a woman into the room. I want to just then shortly mention who's missing is the economic influences. Our economy does not support men being involved or parents being involved, because we spend so much time at work, so much time traveling to the office, and just engage all the time. The last thing I want to just touch on is when we implemented a parenting intervention at a school in Uganda and the positive results that came from there.
I'd love
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more when we talk about best practice. I'd love to hear more about that when we talk about best practice. Going back to your point around we need mothers involved in the conversation. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. For the Heartlines, you know, the Fathers Matter research report, we found that, you know, one of our findings was that women can often play the role of a gatekeeper. And fathers often felt helpless that, you know, I cannot have access to a child because the mother of the child, in a case where they were not together, was playing the role of a gatekeeper. So, I mean, I do agree with you that we do need to mothers and women into the conversation. And I'd love to hear the example that you have on that Ugandan story. So just moving to our second, you know, gear there, I'm keen to find out an ordinary man on the street who's just had a child. What kind of support do they have? Like, where do they go to get support? Where are they getting support from? Where are they learning from? Are our clinics geared in a way that fathers are being trained? I mean, I'm looking to you guys as experts. Are fathers being taken through, this is what happens when the child arrives at home, or do we just do that with mothers? Can you just talk me through where are men finding support to help them become engaged fathers? Percy, where are men finding support? What are those structures at community level on the ground that men can say, listen, I know a social worker, I know at the clinic I'm going to get that kind of the help that I'm needed. I see Percy, we've just lost Percy, so I'll move to you, Tawanda. Where do men go to get support, and what can we do better there?
I'm back.
Oh, okay. I'll just let Tawanda give us his thoughts, and then we'll just move to you, Percy.
Can I just say something? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can we just give Tawanda an opportunity, and then I'll just move to you once he's completed his thoughts.
Okay.
Thank you. Tawanda, you were going to say?
Thank you. So, I think the first place should be families. Like, I know Percy was talking about teenage parenting, and so my biggest take will be like, if families accept and acknowledge that I'm a father, I think that's the biggest barrier that comes with young men to say, okay, how do I actually get involved if the family is not supportive? They might not be supportive due to a number of reasons. They be like they might not even afford a daily meal every day, and they're saying, so we another mouth again. So that's difficult. But so that's I think that's
family. I mean families as a source of support for fathers as they.
Yes, so that's very critical. We need families to actually. So I'm trying to say this in ways that I don't want to be essentialistic, but it's like we want like families to actually say, if it was my daughter, how would I feel if they're chased away or they're not protected, they're not supported, and those kind of that kind of thing. To say, okay, yes, my son or my daughter, this has happened. Yeah. How do I support them to actually become a better parent? So that's very critical. And that's sensitization of families.
Yeah. So I mean, that's an intervention. So you're saying that we not only need interventions that are aimed at fathers, at the boy-child, we also need interventions aimed at families to sensitize them to the importance of an actively engaged father in a child's life. Great. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where do men go for support? What are the support structures that are out there? Where do men and fathers go for support?
Thank you. Is that referred to me?
Yes, that is referred to you.
Hello, Pamela. Oh,
Yes,
okay. In actual fact, before I respond to that question, I wanted us to go back to the previous question, maybe so that we can have a context, because it's like we're talking like Tawanda said yesterday, it's not a homogeneous group. You know,
yes,
we need to disaggregate, you know, in
yes.
terms of the categories of fathers that we have. You know,
Alright.
you have what I call latecomers.
Okay.
These are fathers who come late when the children have grown up, or when the child has grown up. Ne?
Okay.
But you also have the non-resident fathers. They're not staying with the child, but they are involved in the upbringing of the child. And then you have absent fathers. They are there, they are known, but they do not have the kind of any relationship, you know, with the children. And those categories have got different challenges, you know, in terms of accessing their children. But I think our starting point should be maybe the Constitution. The Constitution is very clear to say every child has got the right to parental care. You know, irrespective of what culture says and whatever, but at the end of the day, every child has a right to parental care. And then we need to look.
If I can jump in there, if children have a right to parental care, we know that. We know what the Constitution is saying. But at program, at implementation level, at community level, how does that translate? How do those children get that right that you're referring to? What does it look like? That's why I'm asking around support.
Okay.
Let me
yeah, and I think part of the what we are trying to achieve with what we are currently doing with the Deputy Minister, with the establishment of Boys Assembly.
We have lost Percy there. So, Sulaiman, do you want to weigh in on that? Men going and seeking support, where they go to seek support?
There are a number of interventions currently happening. For example, I know also from Percy's department, there's projects in the Eastern Cape, in the Free State Province. I also know FEMSA and some other organizations that I've personally been involved in who are supporting. But it's not at a rate where we can say that fathers, there's efficient or sufficient support for fathers who grow up. I mean, I want to agree with Tawanda when he says that start at the family, but we also find that that's sometimes often where the problem is also, because families transfer negative intergenerational negative practices that are being transferred from generation to generation. So we want to make sure. So even though we started out saying, look, we want to work with expectant fathers, we want to work with fathers with young children, we found that often the grandparents have such a huge influence on what the child learns, what the child experiences in their early years, that we've said, look, this is important for everyone. So yeah, there's not sufficient support, and we need to make sure that there are spaces for fathers to go to. We are working quite hard with the department to make sure that father training is institutionalized and becomes part of everything, from that fathers become part of everything from the moment of conception. When the mother goes to the clinic, the nurse needs to ask, where's the father? Why is he not present? To the point where we actually create a family environment where fathers can get their time off to support these things. We want to encourage companies to continue with working from home policies, because even though not everyone can work from home, when I'm not on the road, it means traffic is lighter for someone else to get home a bit sooner to be with their families. So those are the type of things that we're looking at.
That is amazing. And I love that, you know, the government is coming on board with, you know, with NGOs such as yourselves to institutionalize. I think I like what you said there. And I'm also keen, I mean, if someone in the chat box knows something, I'd be keen to find out whether our interventions are aimed at urban areas. You know, what is the difference, you know, between interventions aimed at rural, like at a rural community, versus the Sowetos, the Alexes, the Johannesburgs of the world? You know, what is the ratio there? Because are we reaching the urban father, but, you know, neglecting the rural father? But that's just a comment for another day. So I would like us, Percy, sorry I missed you, but I'm sure you'll have other things to say in our next question. I'm just mindful of time.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I think I just want us to park. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. I think I want us to park here, because this is the reason why we are gathered here today. I want us to park here where we're talking about best practice models. What are some of those best practice models for me that we can learn from in South Africa and in the continent? You know, I mean, I've been working on this program for about 2 years now. And part of the challenge that I've encountered is, you know, there's been such a challenge in trying to map out or find out any large interventions that are out there in South Africa. I know there's pockets of interventions that are happening, but there aren't a lot of large interventions. So part of the reason why we gathered here is to learn from each other, I guess, and see what we can roll out, what we can copy, what we can take out. So I'm keen to hear from you, and I want us to park a little bit here. What are those best practice models that you've seen across the continent, and that you've seen in South Africa? And I'm also keen, Tawanda, I know you've done work around HIV/AIDS and programming and intervention there. What can we also learn from other interventions aimed at men that are not necessarily on the topic of fatherhood? What can we copy from those interventions and implement on this end? So I guess, Tawanda, can you start us off, reflecting on your work that you do? Yeah.
Thanks, Pam. I think even before maybe I respond to that, what are the best practices that we can learn from? I mean, we need to understand that for us to achieve best practices, funding is very critical. For you to have a very good intervention, you need to have adequate funding. And because you want to say, okay, how do I intervene with, and I'll still give an example of poor unemployed fathers. Fathers might need a lot of colleagues in attendance are speaking of issues around incentives for them to attend, and all this, because it's important to say, okay, how do we reach out to these men and get them excited, get them involved, in the fatherhood programs. That would need funding. We also need very, I think, close, collaborative, multi-sectoral interventions in place to say, okay, so what is Department of Social Development doing? What is the Department of Home Affairs doing in this? Because interventions need to say, okay, how do we bring different sectors together to ensure that fathers become good fathers, first of all? I'm getting quite interested about issues around promoting poor unemployed fathers' involvement by providing incentives, and then you bring about issues around focusing on the father themselves. Last week I spoke about paternal mental health, which is very critical. We need to look at interventions that say, okay, yes, we look at the man as an individual. Is he okay to actually be able, because you need to be okay to look after the next person. You need to be like, I am fine. So intervention should be like that. I know I'm giving you general responses here, but the most critical, I think, view that I'll have is we need a concerted effort, not, and I've often spoken to you about this, concerted effort on promoting fatherhood in South Africa and not piecemeals. To say, okay, you know, Tawanda Makusha is focusing on fatherhood, like 1, 2, 3, he's doing his small project there. Why don't we come together as programmers, as individuals focusing on fatherhood, to say this is what the country needs and how do we come? I know Prof. Ratele and myself and Professor Linda Richter, we're beginning to conversation on bringing people together to say, how do we bring everyone who's focusing on fatherhood in South Africa? What is it that fathers actually need? And how do we move forward from that? How do we develop interventions that actually are beneficial to fathers? So it's a conversation that's taking place, and hopefully in the next few months, we'll be able to bring people together and ensure that we come together. Tawanda with his own mind, Pamela with the own mind, Professor Ratele, you know, stuff like that. We need to come together and not just say, I'm focused on KZN, Sulaiman is focused on fathers.
Agree with you. Collaboration, you mentioned collaboration and incentivizing. I'm quite keen to unpack that a little bit more. I see we've got a question on that. So, Percy, I'd like to hear your thoughts on those best practice models. I think you had started referring to one of them in the first question around the work that you're doing. So what are those best practice models that the Department of Social Development is aware of or is implementing that you'd like to share with other practitioners and programmers on the panel today?
Okay, no, thanks for that. I think in terms of the legislative framework, we have sort of made some.
I keep losing Percy as he's about to make a very critical point. So can I move to you, Sulaiman? Can you share with us, you know, you were referencing a program in Uganda, if I'm correct?
One of them being the blog there to say we need to strengthen our.
Sorry, Percy, we lost you there. Can you?
So I agree with it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I'm saying we have sort of made inroads in terms of the legislative reforms, and one of them being the inclusion of the paternity leave in the basic condition of employment. So what is lacking is the implementation thereof. And I agree with the doc. I agree with Doc there when he says we need to strengthen our collaborative partnerships, because given the fact that we are working within the context of limited resources, therefore it won't be prudent for us to keep on duplicating.
Yes.
But with the kind of partnerships that we have with the likes of Sonke Gender Justice and other formations like that in the picture, and the indication out there is that we do have enough of these programs that we can learn and share with others, being it in the region or internationally. Okay. However, what is lacking is for us to document those interventions so that we are able to share with others. There's no need for us to reinvent the wheel, because we do have good programs out there. But also the issue of funding, as the good doctor has indicated to it. I know in some provinces they've taken a conscious decision to say they are going to fund organizations that are dealing with men and boys, you know, so that they address some of these issues around absent fathers and gender-based violence. So that's the kind of trainer that we want to see, a political will at the higher level to say this is where we are going. Of course, the dynamics are not the same, but we know that the issue of absent fathers it's a global phenomenon. So there are good pockets of excellence here and there. So we need to check where are the hotspots so that we are able to channel our resources where the need is.
Exactly. So if I can just follow it up there before I move to Sulaiman Percy, who is the Department of Social Development, as I understand, the department that, for instance, if I was starting a program on fatherhood and I just wanted to know what's out there and who's doing what, is it the role of the department to play that coordination role, bringing together the various sectors? Do you have something like that in place, or is it something you're thinking about, or is there completely different organizations that are working and doing that?
And unfortunately, you were breaking. I didn't hear the first part of your question.
No, it's fine. We can move on, Percy. I was just asking whether it's the role of the Department of Social Development to play that coordination role. You and Tawanda are referring to, we need to have more collaborative efforts. I'm saying, who is that body, who is that department that is meant to hold all those various efforts that we are all...
Yes.
Sorry, Percy, I'm losing you.
Of course. Yeah,
sorry, Percy, your line...
We are the lead department working together. I'm saying we are the lead department. Yeah, maybe it's my line. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yes, I can.
Yeah, but everything is fine from my side.
All right. So the Department of Social Development...
I'm saying we are the lead department.
Yeah.
It's leading.
Fantastic.
Yeah, leading.
Fantastic. So when we are having these conversations as a
Okay.
society, we definitely can call on the department to be a part of that, conversation. We you know, as
Exactly.
a department. Okay, that's fantastic. Sulaiman, I'd love to hear your thoughts on best practice models, and if you can also speak a little bit more. So I know you've got the example from Uganda, but if you can also give us a local one. I know you're involved with Men Care, South Africa. If you can tell us what is that about, and you know, just unpack it a little bit more for us. Sulaiman, okay, so I've lost Sulaiman.
No, it was just I was on mute in the video.
All right, okay.
So thank you. I mean, what I'm just checking if I have the question correctly. We're speaking about best practice models.
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I mean, one of the things that we always want to start with, and I mean, like I said earlier on, we've built our core practice around fathers being present, because we believe that when fathers are present, when you're present with something, anything actually, you develop a love for it, you develop an expertise. So that is the place where we always want to start off with our Men Care child care program that we had in the Eastern Cape. It was really around making sure that fathers realize that their job is more than just being financial providers. I mean, that is the thing that to a large extent just drove the work that we do. And once fathers see themselves, they become eager, they become enthusiastic to actually be more involved. Because let's face it, with the role, the expectation that father is the financial provider, he's often not able to live up to that expectation. Most of the time he's not able to live up to that expectation. But we want to make sure that fathers realize that they are part of a unit, part of a bigger family, where all of us work together as a team to make sure that finances are provided, that education are provided, that love and support and cleaning and cooking and all those things that goes along with being part of a family is provided.
So you're saying there's a specific program that you run. I know there's a program that you run within clinics, if I'm correct, to try and promote involvement, especially during the conception period, fathers supporting partners. Is that what you're referring to, or is it just something completely different?
I mean, since I think since 2013, I've been part of implementing the Men Care program, and I've worked with my co-panelists on implementing Men Care in South Africa. But I've always also been privy to being part of conversation on other interventions. And one of the things that I've learned is that because our intervention is so open, it looks at the father not as an individual, but as part of a unit. So we invite the mother in. We want to hear the voice of the child. We want to hear the voice of extended. And we create a space for men not to say, look, or we don't say, this is A, B, and C, what you need to do. But let's reflect on your own environment. Because you might stay in a 5-bedroom house where you can say to your child, look, it's time to go into your room and focus on your schoolwork. And I might stay in a 1-bedroom house. So we use the power of the group. And often we think that, and it's human nature to think that when I'm facing a problem, I'm alone. But once you get 20 men in a room and they see whether I'm working, whether I'm unemployed, if I have a disability, whatever, we actually all have the similar challenges. We can relate to these things. Mothers are also part of the conversation and saying, yeah, I can relate to that. Then things start, it's like a huge aha moment for all of us. I mean, so I want to encourage and support fatherhood and parenting programs to have that focus, a participant focus instead of having an intervention or manual focus. Yeah.
I see. Thank you so much. I think you're all raising, interesting points. I guess, my desire doing this work is that our interventions can reach, beyond the Eastern Cape. We can reach at a national level, at a far bigger level than we currently are. But then I guess it's progress. And with time, we will get there. And I mean, as Tawanda mentioned, that funding is also a key factor when we're talking about accelerating programming, at a national level. But if I can just share briefly the work, talking about national interventions, the work we're trying to do at Heartlines for Fathers Matter is, is to harness the power of media. Is to develop a series of resources, films, short format videos and actual physical resources that we can share with organizations that are working with fathers on the ground. And for instance, we're in the scripting process for 6 films that we will be producing, which are rooted in our research, but they're all focused on the topic of fatherhood. So can't wait to share the intervention and what we want to do there with all of you. But we just we want to use the platform of media to try and change the conversation, to try and change the narrative around fatherhood in South Africa. But, I know I'm mindful of time, and I'm mindful that I still have a lot more questions. And we still need to go into the Q&A. So what I'll do for now is pause and ask that we share. Andile, can you please share a short video that we've prepared as Heartlines? We are storytellers, so you'll see part of our partnership and is basically we've produced a series of conversation starters where we're reflecting on people's experiences and then asking a question at the end. So if Andile, I can ask you to please share that video for us. And once the video has played, we will then move into the Q&A. I've got some interesting questions here that people are asking, and just mindful that we need to wrap up at least by 4:20. So Andile, can you do that for me?
I think I had a pretty cool, open childhood with my dad.
My dad, make sure that I eat before I go to school.
It's constantly being aware that someone's got your back no matter what. There was no doubt in my mind about that.
And he takes us some fun holidays.
The rule was I could date anyone but no one who drove a motorbike. I broke that rule.
The biggest challenge facing fathers today is the busyness of life. It's the rat race. It's this pressure to perform. It's this also pressure to provide for their families.
I grew up with an absent father. Not a typical absent father, was never there. A father that was at home, present, but never present in my life. How do we learn those lessons that in a way got so messed up as we grew up?
The church is very vital in training men, especially in a broken society like ours, South Africa.
We have a lot of social fathers who play a very positive role. You may have grandparents, uncles that you grew up with. You may have teachers whom you see as your role model.
Women, they have that knowledge base where they're able to talk because of the way women discuss things and they talk, so they can bounce. Dads generally don't. Men generally don't.
And that's one of the biggest challenges right now for us as men. We are isolated. We don't want to talk about stuff, and so we don't get to share. We don't get to be vulnerable, and we don't get to be accountable in that space. So we don't have mentors.
We've got a WhatsApp group where dads can join, and dads can pretty much vent, they can discuss, they can bounce ideas off each other.
The only way that we're going to start to unravel these things if we're able to sit down and talk and dialogue, talk about things that have, I want to say, more substance to it, as opposed to kind of sitting in a bar, drinking beer and talking about sport.
There's a lot of posts about mothers doing well, but nothing really about fathers. Fatherhood Friday primarily is just to celebrate being a father.
We need programs that promote positive fatherhood, where fathers were involved in changing their children's nappies, in taking their children for vaccination.
If you're not present in your child's life, it's never too late to start.
Thank you so much to our technical team for that. We are about to move into our Q&A section of the webinar. Thank you so much for your questions. We did try our best to group them, and I'll now field them to our panelists. We've tried to group them into about 4 questions, just mindful of time. So I'll go in with the first one. Do you give men incentives? So our panelists, I hope you're listening and ready to answer those questions. Do you give men incentives to participate in programs, and what works? And is there specific assistance provided for unemployed fathers who want to be part of these interventions? So I know Tawanda mentioned incentives. So do we give men incentives in order to participate in programs? So if we can just briefly give your responses, and then we'll move to the other 3 questions.
So I think what I'll say is men's involvement is good for children. Mm-hmm. Men want to be involved, and women also want men to be involved, right? Mm-hmm. So the lack of men's involvement, we know that has got negative effects on maternal and child health. So rather than speaking of it as incentives to say, okay, it's like incentives, I know I use that word, but maybe I should say financial support for men to actually be involved, for poor unemployed men to be involved. Because what we know is if you call someone, it's like a stipend. If you call someone to say, we want you to be part of this, and what of this fatherhood intervention, and what from you is to be able to say, okay, you are going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll provide, some small stipends, like what the government is doing right now for everyone, like during the lockdown, for everyone who was unemployed. Say, okay, we've seen, as Zoe was speaking last week, and that use this money actually for childcare, for child. So we're saying for poor black or white or Indian or you know what, with regardless of race, everyone, a poor unemployed father should to say, okay, what is it that I can do, that I can get? And this is a bigger conversation that maybe we can have with Department of Social Development and say, okay, do we, make
incentivize
such commitments to promote fatherhood? Especially now, yesterday you saw the statistics, South Africa showing that we have a negative growth of 51%. And what that means is a lot of people are still going to lose jobs. And so that includes other men who are also going to lose jobs. And what does that mean for childcare, child support, maternal and child health, and fathers themselves? So we need to start thinking of those things.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on incentivizing unemployed fathers? I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, let's not say unemployed, but fathers in general. I think there are more benefits, social benefits, to fathers being involved in the upbringing of their child, because often people worry about the economic loss of fathers not being at work, but they need to look at the bigger picture, the social benefits of fathers being involved. And I can mention quite a few of them. Is that, when the father is involved in the child's life, there's less likelihood of a child being involved in delinquent behavior, because there is that kind of a support, and supervision from a father, and there is also less likelihood of the child being involved in violent behavior, because some of these children, the bullying in school, it's just an outlet for them to express what they cannot express at home. More so if maybe if the mother doesn't even talk about the whereabouts of the father. They grow up very angry, and then they take it out to other children in school. So if the father is involved, there's less likelihood of the violent behavior. But also there is less likelihood of the child being involved in the abuse of any form of substance. You understand? But also to the other partner, there's a less whatever mental problems, because now the mother does not have to bear the brunt of being the only one raising the child. But importantly is that there is high opportunities of academic success, if both parents are involved, irrespective of what is happening between the parents. But if both parents are involved, the child are more likely to progress, academically. Thank you.
Sulaiman, any
shortly
weigh in on the incentives?
I mean, I've been part of interventions where we've incentivized in different ways, whether it be a meal or giving a stipend. But the most effective one I found has been to provide a meal that parents can go home and cook for their children, whether it be giving them a loaf of bread and some eggs or some potatoes that they could go home and cook. That has been the most successful, because we need to realize that most often when we are busy with community-based interventions, we find unemployed fathers. Those fathers who are sometimes standing on the corner, sitting around, they are busy looking for something, trying to make a way to feed. If you take them away for 2 hours, it's 2 hours that they could have earned something. So you are putting them in a class talking about how good it is to hold your child and all those type of things. There's no holding your child when you get home and everyone is hungry. There's no time for that. There's pressure on you. You feel like you're not a man. You're not doing your job as a father. So it's important that we make sure that we support those basic needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If the basic needs are not covered, we cannot build self-esteem and all those other
and self-actualize.
So we need to make sure that our interventions, at least depending on where we implementing them, but we need to make sure that the basics are covered and that we support fathers in covering the basics.
That is very, very useful and very practical. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'll move on to, I'll just throw in a last question. I'm just mindful of our time. Is there much being done to help ECD centers to know how to bring fathers into the picture more? If fathers get involved in their children's education at an early age, hopefully it will carry through into later years. So the question here is, how do we get fathers involved at an ECD level? I mean, I've often come home. I have a child who's an ECD center, and on the note is often a note to mom and never a note to dad. And those are just some of the things that I encounter in my day-to-day parenting journey. But how do we make fathers a part of, the ECD journey for children?
So if I could get in, Pam.
Sure.
I think we should actually look at this as a societal issue rather than only looking at it at ECD.
Yeah.
Like at the Pavilion Mall, it's parking for mom and baby, stuff like that.
Yes.
And so it's the idea that women come to the mall or take their children to an ECD center and they are responsible for homework and all this. So that's a societal kind of like perception.
Yeah.
Which has got a historical kind of like background, right? But so how do we now start sensitizing, like from the family point of view? Like I know a couple of men now do a lot of drop-offs and pickups for their children. They feed their children, change nappies like we're talking about, and so it's issues around that, and it's issues around the fact that when I'm seen at the mall carrying my daughter or running around in the park with my daughter, people should not applaud me or say, "Oh, look at that." No, it should be seen as normal. Thing that a father needs to do. He needs to do all those things. It's not like I need a trophy to do that. So societal perception around the world is critical to say, okay, even when you change those perceptions, then you actually realize that people are actually saying, okay, you'll notice I was getting the same issue at my daughter's school. But then I went to the principal and I said, you know what? When you address these notes to us, can you please write mom and dad? Because the idea is you see me every day, and I think everyone also who comes, every father feels neglected. I spend more time with the kids because of my partner's work. Then you receive a note written, dear mom. So I'm like, okay, let's change those perceptions. Let's
the social norms. The social norms need to be shifted. Sulaiman, do you want to weigh in on the role
I'm thinking of personal experience, but let me start by our workshops, and I mean Percy is aware of one of our activities where we need to do values clarification, and we ask the question, or we make the statement that mothers make better parents than, or women make better parents than men. And do you agree? And then everyone automatically agrees that without even thinking what it means to say that women just automatically make better parents than men, but they don't. It is something that is socially constructed and socially learned over time, something that is socially encouraged. If someone comes into my house and it's dirty, and then they want to know, but where's the mom? They never look for the dad. If my wife is away and the kids are alone with me, my siblings or my mother gives me a call. Are you okay? Do you have food? Do I need to come and brush the children's hair? So when I'm away and my wife is alone, no one is doing that to see how they can support. So I think there's also the natural expectation, because of that expectation that women need to be involved. They also feel I will be judged if I don't do it. And fathers are more relaxed because this is not my role. I'll wait for the garden to become dirty. Then even though I'll stay in the flat, I'll wait for something to do outside. So those are some of the things. And I mean, thinking of my experience going to the hospital, mother and father going with a kid, and then the security says, only mother and the child. And I push and I push and I challenge him and I say, then eventually he comes back and he says, okay, one parent and the child. So those are the things that, and we need to make sure that ECD centers are deliberate about involving fathers, are deliberate, like Tawanda said, about writing that note, making sure it's mother and father, asking for parental meetings with father, asking the parents, like, speaking to both of them in terms of how they can support the child with the academic development and those type of things. Yeah. And then we might see some progress.
And so various structures. So beyond ECD, I guess it's schools, it's clinics, it's everything. All the structures that exist in society. I mean, I've heard of fathers that travel with their children and are unable to change their nappies and have to resort to changing the nappy in the boot because the changing station or the nappy station is inside the ladies' bathroom. You know, so we need to start expanding. If we're going to get more fathers involved structurally, we need to basically start changing our language, first of all, and we also need to create spaces that allow for both parents to participate. I am aware of our time, and just to remind people that we're about to wrap up our webinar, and a special thank you to those that have attended the webinar since the 19th of August. Thank you so much for just coming every week and, you know, commenting and participating. Please, can you remember to complete the survey that will be emailed to you tomorrow? And as you exit this webinar, that survey will also be, you'll be also led to that. Please stay connected with the National Research Foundation at NRF_news and also at CEO Human for the Center of Excellence, the Center of Human Excellence. And for our Heartlines initiative, please go to www.fathersmatter.org.za. And I'm just going to invite some closing comments to our panelists. There's still many questions, but I'm mindful of time. If I can just get final comments, closing comments on what you want to see. What is the future that we're going to? If you can dream big, what does that look like for you? So your closing comment on the topic of what works, looking at positive interventions for fathers. And I start with you, Percy.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. All I want to say is that, you know, every child deserves to have a father in his or her life. And when we talk about fathers, often people tend to think that when fathers have the responsibility only to raise boy children. And it's not like that. Every child needs a father in his or her life. And sometimes we understand that children do not have fathers, not because of their own making. You know, there's a concept that we have developed of social fathers. It can be any member in the community, a role model, a positive role model. It can be a teacher in school. It can be everybody, as long as parents are aware that whom their children look up to as a positive role model in their life. It can be an uncle. It can be any other person, you know, who can make a significant positive impact in the lives of the child. But as long as parents, we are involved in that. That's all that I can say. And as a department, we are really committed to making sure that we bring fathers on board to also take their responsibility or their role in their families in terms of contributing, you know, to the nation building. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Percy. Tawanda, can you just provide us your closing comments briefly?
Thanks, Pam, and thanks, colleagues, for the attendance. I think I would like to close by saying that we need to avoid preaching to the converted. We often meet in these small rooms and we talk to each other and we say, this is what we want to do, this is what. But the most effective interventions are actually should be targeted actually to the most vulnerable and the fathers who are not involved at all. So I think that's the new narrative we need to start pushing, to say, you know, I'll give an example of a community healthcare worker who knows that at Tawanda's house there's always domestic violence. He will usually avoid that house because of the burden it comes with. But I think that's what we need to start targeting. How do we help the most vulnerable to actually, you know, come out of those situations and say, okay, this intervention worked. We might not reach today, but we might, if we reach one person, two people, then we'll have had a successful intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tawanda. Sulaiman, your closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you, Pam. I want to say that in 20 years' time, when our children appear on a program like this, what do you want them to say, to remember about you as a father? So be that, whatever it is that you want them to say about you. I had a loving father who cared about me, who did this and did that. Be that. And then I also want to just share with Heartlines and other media to just keep sending out or putting out these reinforcing, positive reinforcements. It's so important in a community where everyone is saying it's bad for father to clean a nappy, that somewhere on TV or somewhere on a billboard he sees that it's actually okay. So please continue doing the good work that you are doing. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks so much to you, our panelists, for your insightful conversations, for participating, and for your time. I'd also like to thank the Oak Foundation again for making this webinar series possible. And lastly, before I close off, just a special shout out to Beth, who's at the Center of Excellence, to Lerato, who is from the National Research Foundation, to Latasha's research manager at Heartlines, Liwani, Andile. These are the people who've been behind the scenes for the past 4 weeks, making this webinar series a reality. Thank you so much for your time. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Lastly, just to mention that the webinar is recorded and the link will be made available for everybody who attended. When you exit the webinar, just remember to do that survey for us. And let us continue promoting the positive presence of men in the lives of children. I thank you. Bye, everyone.